The sages were truly disgraceful. Disgraceful both in their rather coarse culture and in their remarkably low level of thinking. They simply were not individuals who thought systematically, deeply, in a truly organized way with a clear argument and coherent reasoning. They just shot off statements, and quite often in a very blunt and direct manner. And in fact, they distorted the Bible. They distorted it in a way that, let me tell you, is a shame, simply a disgrace. I'll read you the story of David and Goliath, which actually has 3 versions in the Bible. And when a reasonable person deals with books like the Bible and tries to understand them, what does he do when there's a contradiction? So let's first read the contradiction, and then we'll also see what the sages say about it. So in the book of Samuel 1, chapter 17, verse 56, it says that David killed Goliath. And David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine, that is Goliath, and killed him, and there was no sword in David's hand. In short, he killed Goliath. That's in Samuel 1, chapter 17, verse 50. In 2 Samuel, chapter 21, verse 19, it says the following. There was again war at Gob with the Philistines. And Elhanan son of Jair-Oregim struck down Goliath the Gittite. The Bethlehemite, Goliath the Gittite, and the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. A weaver's beam is the wooden rod that connects the warp and weft for weavers. So he had a spear, he had a sword with the weight of a sword. So who killed Goliath the Gittite? Elhanan, the son of Jair, that's recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 21 verse, and further detailed in 1 Chronicles, a parallel account. Chapter 20 verse 5, I'm reading, it says, and there was again war with the Philistines, and Elhanan, son of Jair, or son of Jair, this is apparently the same Elhanan, son of Jair, mentioned in 2 Samuel, only here it doesn't say that he killed Goliath the Gittite. Here it says, and Elhanan, son of Jair, struck Lachmi, the brother of Goliath the Gittite. He killed Goliath's brother. And the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. That is, there are 3 different stories here that share a common phrase, which is, and the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. Also in Chronicles, and the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. I said a manor is the crossbar of the warp and weft of a killing tool that existed in the past. In 1 Samuel as well, it says, and the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. And also in 1 Samuel chapter 10 verse 6, it says, and an arrow. It says, and an arrow, not and the shaft, but it is read as and the shaft. And the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. Now, there are 3 stories here that, on the face of it, do not match. They contradict each other. Not just apparently, they actually contradict each other. What does a historian or a textual scholar do? Normal. What do you do when there is the same story? So think about it. Everyone should consider for themselves what seems reasonable when they come across any book. It doesn't matter which, and they see a contradiction. What do you do with that contradiction? If you ask me, it seems reasonable to me that there was some story where one of the Israelites killed one of the Philistines, and somehow the story evolved and took on different variations, and each person wrote their own version. And it could be that there were also political factions who, for example, wanted to exclude David, so it's not David who killed him. So the author who supported David gave him the credit. That's what happens in human society, where sometimes people take credit for someone else's actions. It happens. Now that explains it. It's a story that evolves, and there are versions that we don't really know because we don't know exactly what happened back then, and that's also why there are different versions of names. That explains it. Now what does Yonatan ben Uziel do? In other words, what do the sages do? After all, they believe, as the researchers of the Midrash and Agada say, they say, first of all, you have to get to know the sages in order to understand their absurdity, their shallowness. In fact, and they admit this, the Talmudic scholars. There is no philosophy in the sages' writings. There isn't. What can you do? There is no poetry in the sages' writings. There is poetry in the Bible, but there is no poetry in the sages' writings. So what is there? They interpret Midrash and Agada. They interpret the verses. They take the verses and are constantly learning something new as part of the interpretation they strongly believe is true. They can say, without embarrassment, because they believe it's true, don't read it this way, read it that way. Don't read Vehadrada, but Vecheredet, Vehadad Vecheredet. Don't read it as 3 years, but as a third of the years. And then they transform it, and then they establish laws based on don't read it this way, but that way. Rather read it like this. Now, if you say don't read it this way, read it that way, you can take any text and just turn it around. Don't read it as table, read it as chair. Don't read it as mother, read it as father. What's the problem? And so on one hand it says that David killed Goliath, but on the other hand it says that Elhanan killed Goliath. So who really killed him? Look at what Jonathan ben Uziel says. I'll read you the translation of Jonathan ben Uziel, who lived and was a student of Hillel the Elder in the 1st century CE, and wrote a translation, an Aramaic translation of the Bible. So he says in the 2nd Samuel chapter 21, and he says the following. It is written, and there was again war at Gath, right? And Elhanan, the son of Jare-Oregim, struck Goliath. Jonathan ben Uziel says, and there was yet another significant battle, another intense encounter, a fierce battle at Gob with the formidable Philistines. And David, the valiant son of Jesse, courageously killed him. And David, the brave son of Jesse, ultimately slew him. It is written Elhanan, but he translates it in Aramaic as David. Do you understand this whole thing? Now all the biblical commentators get confused. They don't know. It's like this, and they come up with all sorts of inventions and get tangled up. Radak comes and brings the explanation of Jonathan ben Uziel and says, and then I didn't know why it says they called him Elhanan. What's the deal? To call him Elhanan. But do you understand the absurdity? All the nonsense. Just imagine that Josephus Flavius, who was a prominent historian during the devastating destruction of the Second Temple and meticulously described the intense battles and the compelling story of the Jewish people at that significant time, in one particular place, writes that Titus was the Roman governor who utterly destroyed the temple, and elsewhere he emphatically says that no, the actual governor was Pilate. So what then? And then the sages will come and wisely say that Titus is indeed Pilate. That's precisely how it goes. Do you understand the nonsense of the sages? The absurdities of the sages? Now, it's not just that. It's not just that they combine people together. Darius is Cyrus and Cyrus is Ahasuerus. These three different kings who ruled Persia at different times became a single person according to the sages in Tractate Rosh Hashanah. This is the Torah of the convert. The same goes for Daniel and also for Sheshbazzar. Zerubbabel is mentioned in one verse, Zerubbabel and Nehemiah. And then they say Zerubbabel is Nehemiah. How can you say Zerubbabel is Nehemiah when Zerubbabel and Nehemiah are both written? But that's not a problem. Everything is just brushed off. Nothing matters. Everything is brushed off because they imagine that the entire Bible has divine unity and no contradictions. And then they babble, making up things and twisting the text. And they make a mockery of the text. Now look how far they go in making a mockery of the text. From Tractate Sota, I'm reading to you from Tractate Sota, page 46b. I said that they interpret the text. In other words, they distort the text, confuse people, and they think that's the real interpretation. That's the thing. And I also said that they are arrogant, they lack nobility, they lack loftiness. It's shameful, simply shameful. Look at what they say. It says in the verse, and his name was Goliath from Gath. That's what it says in the verse, and his name was Goliath from Gath. They come and say the following. Rabbi Yosef taught, everyone would trample his mother like a wine press, gat. A gat is the place where they press grapes to make wine. So why does it say, and his name was Goliath from Gath? What do you mean, why does it say that? It says so because it notes his place, from Gath. No, they say Gath, that is, as Rabbi Yosef taught, that everyone tramples. Meaning, they sleep with his mother as if it's like pressing grapes, a process that is quite laborious. Tell me, what kind of vulgarity is this, and what kind of interpretations? What is this? It doesn't end there. It's written in the verse. We said that sometimes there are words that are written one way but read differently. So it's written mi'arot, but in the verse it's read as ma'arakot. Why? Rabbi Yosef taught, why is it called mi'arot? Because everyone poured in, meaning inserted, poured in, penetrated. Everyone poured into his mother. Why is everything about sex and everything is about abundance and treading? Now, it doesn't end there either. They came and decided that it's written in the book of Chronicles. They're strange, they're really strange. The levels of nonsense they reach, it's just unbelievable. It's written in the book of Chronicles. It implies that Goliath, his mother's name was Harpha. These were born to Harpha in Gath. There are several names there, and one of them is Goliath. So their mother is Orpah. Now, they decided, as they always do, that two people are actually one. That this Orpah mentioned as Goliath's mother is the same Orpah from the book of Ruth. In the story of Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon and Chilion married Ruth and Orpah. So Orpah is Goliath's mother. How did they come to that conclusion? It just wasn't credible. And then they ask, why does she have two names? Why does she have two names, right? So look at what they say. Look, it's so brazen. And why exactly is she called Orpah? And what is the origin of her name? Even though her real name is Harpah. So Rav said, why do they call her Orpah? Because everyone approached her from behind. Meaning they would have sex with her from behind, to put it bluntly. Let's say, how serious is this whole thing? Is this serious? They combine two different women and interpret the name Orpah as if everyone would approach her from behind. How can you take them seriously? When there's no wisdom, no philosophy, no poetry, nothing, just nonsense. And Shmuel, what does Shmuel say? The opposite. No. Shmuel says that her name is Orpah. And why is she called Arpah? Because everyone would trample her like threshing. What is threshing? It's the very specific place where they traditionally thresh the golden wheat. So one says that they trampled her from the back, that's why she was called Orpah. And another says she was called Arpah because they threshed her like sheaves, just as they thresh wheat. What can I tell you? What is the tragedy in all of this? When dedicated and profound Talmudic researchers arrive, they meticulously hold and carefully set up comprehensive and in-depth courses in profound Jewish thought. And then they diligently begin the intensive process of threshing. They truly start threshing with the same vigorous intensity and thoroughness as one would meticulously thresh wheat in a vast field. All these foolish topics of the sages just to come and say, guys, these sages are just a parliament of stories. That maybe they're not serious, they're superficial. There's no philosophy there, and you know it. There's no poetry, and you know it. There are just pilpulim and nonsense, and people are connected without any problem. You have a translation from Hebrew to Aramaic by Yonatan ben Uziel. It says El Chanan, the translator is David. Come on, are you kidding? And these people come and start finding some deep message. Secular Talmudic researchers. And they call themselves Jewish thought. It's just Jewish babble. And besides that, I believe Hamas should be eliminated.